Rupert Murdoch is claiming that the Times of London has a global readership of 26 million per month. So is it not true that because we now have this explosion of choice beyond our own backyard, beyond in fact our own street where our newspaper was presented to us, that in fact now you have got an opportunity for more people to find out more things from around the world? The question is, what is the content, whether it's the Times of London or whether it's the Eureka report or whatever it might be, and who's producing this content and what sort of training do they need? For example, I'm sure you've all been watching the tragedy unfold in Mumbai. Some of that content, the most urgent content, was produced by Australians in this case, holed up in their hotel rooms in Mumbai on mobile phones and giving interviews to media outlets here in Australia. Now that's content. It doesn't require any training to produce that content.
No, but you see,
but the way it's used is really the question.
But you see, Mary, that's the trouble with it. You know, I intensely dislike the word content to describe journalism. You know, journalism is not content. Content can be anything. Content includes advertising, includes Big Brother is content, everything. Journalism is not content. Those people that produced pictures out of Mumbai, or I remember when I was in America, the Virginia Tech massacre, for the first half a dozen hours was covered entirely by students who had phone cameras.
But what do you mean covered? So, I mean, your pictures, or this is what happened to me, or I saw someone do this. Yes. But that's not analysis of why or what.
That's what I was about to say. That's content, but that's not journalism. That's not journalism. At the same time, as far as training is concerned, you know, in the last 20 years, journalism has gone from being a trade to being a profession. I'm not sure that it is a profession. What are the professional qualifications for journalists? What are the things? What are how do you? On what basis do you call yourself a professional journalist? It's not like law or medicine or architecture or engineering, where you have to have certain skills and you can't be an engineer if you don't know how a bridge may be built. Or, well, you may now, because you can be other sorts of engineers. But so, Eric, is Ramona...
Because what we're leading to, of course, is the training...
Well, Ramona, are you a professional journalist?
Well, Michael, I actually don't think that's really the question. I think it's about the people who are producing what we read or see or hear. And it's much more democratic now in the new environment about who produces what. And I suppose the question really goes to, what is the training for... Oh, I'm sorry,
you got it on.
aren't you? Righto, let's see if we can get this thing to work. How's that?
Much better.
That's better. I should speak into it. So the question I'm leading to is the people who are producing what we read or see or hear, how are they being trained, and is it a different requirement in the new media and the future of journalism for that training?
Well, I think there are new requirements for journalists that are not so much about training. Well, there's obviously a need for training on how to use these the pipes, as Ramona explained, and that's in a way that's the equivalent of learning how to be a plumber. There's certain tools that you've got to know how to use, and journalists have to learn how to use these new tools. But I do think that there is a need, and I hope that this is one of the things that we'll be able to do at Melbourne University, and that is there is a need in this world, in an increasingly complicated world, for journalists to have specialised knowledge in areas that they're covering. I mean, the trend, for instance, in some media in the United States, I know that, for instance, we've talked a lot about the New York Times, but the New York Times, the Wash Post, even some of the bigger commercial networks, for instance, their science reporters are not just science undergraduates, but they have been science researchers. They're medical reporters are doctors who continue to train. We have an absolutely desperate need, in my view, to have reporters that understand the science of climate change, that can sort of weigh what is serious in what's being said and what isn't.
The big institutions need to bring young people into it and have people sitting at the feet of other people who've been doing it for a long time.
So, Eric, does the new media have the ability to do that form of training, or is there another form of training that's required for the 21st century?
I think there's another form of journalism that's emerging, if you want to call it journalism. The two purists sitting next to me may not call it that, and that is the fact that up until certainly 10 years ago, the whole notion of journalism was that media organisations employed journalists and editors and news directors and so on, and they determined the content, and it was one-way traffic. And they were the gatekeepers, and they delivered that to their audience, and their audience either consumed it or they didn't. Well, now, with particularly online, media is becoming a two-way conversation. Now, at some levels, that's not, particularly palatable, and there's a lot of discussion about blogs and the validity and value of blogs. But the fact is that there's been this enormous democratisation of information. A lot of it isn't great, but some of it is really good. And the whole idea that the gatekeepers sit there and determine who are journalists and which experts can write in the op-ed pages, and we'll determine who they are and whatever, it's just disappearing. I mean, every day on Crikey, we have a little bit of gossip and that sort of thing, but we employ a number of journalists. We employ a fantastic Canberra political correspondent full-time in Parliament House. But every day on Crikey we publish about 25 stories, and at least 4 or 5 of those are written by all sorts of different experts from different areas. I mean, there are particular subjects we focus on, like the whole Indigenous debate. We have a team of about 4 or 5, or probably more, a network actually of probably several dozen medical academics who write from time to time in the areas of their expertise, health policy and the way that health marketing is manipulated and that kind of thing. And these are professors and whatever. And they can write, and they do write. They never had a place really in the old-style journalism unless a reporter talked to them and an editor permitted what they said to be published. Now...
But why couldn't they write opinion pieces before?
They could, but there was a limited amount of that, and there were gatekeepers there. And, we still have gatekeepers in that sense. But,
And how do you know what the particular interests of the people who are sending things into you are? I mean, how do you know they're not married to somebody who's an important part of the story or have some other kind of commercial interest in that story?
Well, I suspect we do as much checking as The Age does about its op-ed contributors, to be quite honest. Like them, we sometimes make mistakes, but not all the time. I mean, I think it's very fashionable to knock something like Crikey.
I'm a subscriber to Crikey. I read it every day. I mean, but what I'm concerned about is this idea of, it's all democratic, it's all very well. I mean, we at Radio National, we've got something called the pool now, and people can make little videos and they can write things, or they can make radio things about their own street and their own lives, and they can send them in and they can put them up. And that's fantastic. But sometimes most of them won't be actually stuff that you want to really see or hear. And it's fair enough. I mean, they're playing and they're learning how to do it. And I had to play and learn how to do it too. And so people are doing that too. And it's a fantastic thing to have it broadcast in that way on that. But on my show, I don't want to have people talking off the top of their head about stuff they don't know anything about.
I agree with that.
I don't want to listen to that. And also, I'm going to retire, and I want to stay home and listen to stuff and without going mad. So I need to make sure there are other people who are learning how to do things that I've learned how to do, and so that I can proudly listen and read and think I am enjoying my old age because there's something to listen to. And
Eric, it cost Fairfax, I think it was around $750,000 to cover the Iraq War. Now, that's a lot of money. I don't know what it cost the ABC, but I know those figures, and that was up to a year or so ago. It costs the New York Times $2.5 million a year. It has cost them to maintain that. Who's going to do that in the commercial media when these newspapers can no longer afford to do it?
Well, I agree with you. You know, I'm not suggesting that isn't hasn't been a good thing, and I'm not suggesting that it shouldn't continue. But what I am saying is, if the funding source or the business model to support that doesn't exist, it won't happen. And I think we should confront reality. And to pick up on what Ramona's saying, and to some extent what you said, Michael, was, yeah, the New York Times science writer or reporter is, a science graduate. The medical reporter is may well have been a doctor. The architectural writer is a former architect, etc. And that's fantastic. Very little of that happens here, by the way.
That's
has
right.
happened.
Yeah,
but maybe what's happening here is that the doctors and the scientists and the architects actually don't become journalists, but their views are now becoming part of the media. And, they're writing and they have access to write in a way that didn't exist when the gatekeepers, kept tight control over the gates.
That's true, but for instance, you mentioned who will ask and examine the relationship, for instance, between the medical researchers that you use or that we use to talk about drug developments, their relationship with the drug companies. They're not going to raise those issues. They're not going to talk about that. What you need is journalists to do that.
Well, it's interesting, though, because what happens is if you run a piece by a medical professor and he's got a conflict of interest and you didn't know about it, and you should try and do whatever you can to check in advance, and increasingly, the internet itself is a source of a lot more information about all of this. But if it gets through, the audience comes back and they say, did you know this person had a conflict of interest, and here's what it is, and you publish that.
But wouldn't it be better to know that before you publish it? Of course it would be better,
but someone has to fund it, and if the funding's not there, we can talk about it till we're blue in the face, but it won't happen.
That's true, but what I'm saying is...
That's why you need to fund the public broadcast.
Yes, and you do, and I think that's true. I actually think that the future of journalism in Australia is going to depend more and more on the ABC, and it's certainly true that it's going to depend more and more on the ABC in regional Australia.
As it has for a very long time.
And more that's going to be the case in metropolitan Australia as well. I think that's true. And you know why that is? Because it has a model that isn't broken.
Can I stay with funding, but from a different perspective? We talk about the multiplicity of choice now on what we can find online if we have access to online, and that's another question. The sort of digital poverty line is a reality in Australia. There are still families that don't have computers, for example. But if we have this multiplicity of choice, is it going to be increasingly a question that you get top quality journalism in any specific sector if you can afford to pay for it, and the risk that you will get lesser quality journalism unless you can pay for it? I'll put the context to you. The Wall Street Journal, for example, you can get that online anytime you like, free, virtually free. They are then offering a special subscriber service which gives you more information than's available online. And then there is the third premium offer, which is available if you pay top price. It's very much focused on business information, and you can download it onto your BlackBerry or Palm Trio. Now, that may be that the new media model works very effectively for business news and business journalism. But is there a risk that this form of choice will in fact only be a choice for those who have the means to access it? Well,
I think that kind of race has been run, and is over basically, and 99% of the content is now free. If you're talking about journalism, yes, the Wall Street Journal has a subscription, and the Financial Times has a small subscription after you read a certain number of stories, but that's almost it. Almost every other newspaper and almost every other magazine is free online, and that's the model. And I think it's beyond going
won't change.
No. So it's, yes, you have to have a computer and you have to have access to the internet, and I don't know what the statistics are, but I suspect, whilst you're right, there are some people that don't have it. That's a growing minority, almost a tiny minority now. And, the government's committed to the broadband rollout. They're not doing a particularly good job about it at the moment, but I don't think there's any doubt that internet access costs are coming down and will be universal, like television and radio are very soon.
But what's happening there is, I think that as this, I don't think that it's going to be an issue of about who can pay for access to information on digitally, because I think Eric's right. It's going to be free, and it's going to rely on advertising to support it. What is happening as newspapers shrink and as commercial media shrinks, and that's not just in metropolitan Australia, but across regional Australia. What large areas of our community are not covered. Our local councils are no longer covered in any real way. How do you cover areas of disadvantage in our community when there aren't the resources to do it, and there is no advertising support for publications or radio stations that cover those issues?
Isn't there a bigger risk that journalists now are filing for so many outlets, or filing so often each day, that they have less and less time to do the research, whatever the story is that they should be covering? I'm reminded of Dorothy Parker, that great wit who wrote for Vanity Fair in the 20s, and she said the worst form of journalism is that which is written without wit or without research. And we do see a bit of that about now, don't we? Probably always have. So is that the real problem, that journalists don't have the time or the resources to do the job well, whatever they're covering?
Well, I think that's been a problem for a long time. I mean, in Australia, I don't think that there has actually been, up to this point, a dramatic reduction in the number of journalists at the ABC or on the mainstream media. I don't think that's happened yet. It's happening now, but it hadn't happened up to this point. So I do think, of course, that increasingly the idea that the Age or the Sydney Morning Herald actually covers its city is nonsense. It doesn't cover.
But where are the big breaking stories? I mean, when over your time, you both have been editors of newspapers. I mean, haven't you noticed that there has not been the kinds of things that you would have held the front page for in the olden days?
Well, I don't actually agree with that at all. I think.
Well, tell me which are the big stories and who's doing
the
it?
Age broke a story yesterday.
Yes.
I mean, look, the fact of the matter is, in my view, having been involved in journalism for 30 plus years, the journalism today is just as good, if not, well, probably much better than it was 30 years ago. And there are, as it stands, the problem is, the business model has busted, and it is now in rapid decline now, as Michael said, just in the last year or so. But in my experience, the journalists that are hired now are, if anything, better and brighter than they were 20 years ago. They're really smart, they're passionate. There are journalism schools at almost every university in Australia. 15 years ago, there were probably one or two.
But that's irrelevant if you're thinking about people who need 4 or 5 months to dig at a story.
That's true. That's increasingly a problem. I agree with Eric that I think the standard of journalism is higher now than it was 25 years ago.
Okay, well, I think on that note, thank you very much for being terrific audiences. I want to thank the Fabian executive, Jack and others are here. The Friends of the ABC and Glenys and her team are here. Thank you for all the organisation, and most particularly to our speakers. I think you'll agree it's been provocative in the best sense of the word, very informative, and of course based on direct knowledge and experience. So we thank for their time and their thoughts. Michael Gawenda, Ramona Koval and Eric Beecher.